If you're looking for a new custom-built PC, check out evolvepcs.gg. Maybe get yourself a nice Datto edition rig while you're at it. Use code Datto at checkout to save some money as well. So, on the day that I went out of town in classic Datto fashion, Bungie released this exotic sorta mission from the whole catching 3 exotic fish thing that started a few weeks ago. For those of you not in the loop at all, just in case, if you catch 3 exotic fish, 1 from each destination, your lure will gain broken blade pieces, and if you deposit these pieces into 3 statues in Deep Dive on the same run, a doorway opens up in the second stage of Deep Dive, which will lead you to this secret objective. People are saying exotic mission as it has similar qualities to the exotic missions from the past, Whisper of the Worm, Outbreak Perfected, although not on the same scale. This secret objective involves killing 2 bosses within 10 minutes. The first boss taking place across a couple of rooms, and then the second boss being a very aggressive tormentor in a big maze-like room. Both bosses have the same mechanics, kill 3 specially named minotaurs in order to gain a damage buff, basically the same thing as the final boss of Shattered Throne, but the health pool of the second boss is very large. People have told me it has a bigger health pool than Nezarec. There are also some hidden collectibles to go get after the mission is over within the maze. 1 in each quadrant of the maze, 1 below it, 1 in the middle area, and then 1 at the statue. This, for lack of a better term, mission is not too bad. I initially tried this solo, hoping that it could be a tough but sort of doable solo challenge, and while it is technically soloable, it is a much harder solo than I was anticipating, so I ultimately ended up breezing through it with a 3-player team. Divinity basically trivializes the second boss. You just throw on a linear fusion, you drop a well, and you can chunk the boss down considerably in a single damage phase. This is because normally, without Divinity, the boss's crit spot is much more difficult to hit, and non-crits might as well do 0 damage. So if you are struggling with this boss, in case there's anyone watching this who hasn't done this yet, I would highly recommend breaking out a Divinity and a couple of linear fusions. Really was not that bad at all with this setup, multiple minutes to spare. Now, I heard that there were complaints about the timer. I don't think there is something the Destiny community hates more than timers on activities, because it means that they can't leisurely stroll through an activity, and they actually need to try. And if that response doesn't tell you my opinion of timers, then I am, and pretty much always will be, okay with timed missions in this particular style. This is supposed to be a somewhat intense combat challenge, and if you can take as long as you want, then there would be no tension. That's why Deep Dive has timers, that's why raid bosses technically have timers. They are there to keep the intensity alive. I understand being annoyed at having to do a couple of Deep Dive stages if you die and you have to restart, but oh well. That being said, while I think Deep Dive itself is a great activity that I hope gets some more attention in the future, Deep Dive is now capable of becoming 3 different activities in one. You have a normal run, you have maybe a tier 7 run, or an exotic run. And I think that's pretty cool that it can become 3 different things. But I also pretty much never play with random matchmaking. If I want to play Deep Dive, I'm grabbing a couple of friends to play with every single time. If you're a solo queue player, then the odds of the other 2 people in your group also wanting to do the exact same thing as you is very, very low. On top of then also having players good enough to do the thing that you want to do in the first place. And predictably, this has made people pretty annoyed. I will say that I would be actually pretty surprised if Bungie ends up tweaking anything related to anything with Deep Dive, because even if you split the 3 activities into their own matchmaking, there's no guarantee that the people you match with will still know what they're doing, although there's definitely a higher chance. But someone who has no idea what's going on might queue into the tier 7 node or the exotic node just because it's there. It's not the 100% complete solution that I think some people think it is. However, the alternative, which is basically how things are right now, can leave the node feeling unplayable for most people. I see a lot of complaints about people leaving immediately or after one round, and that's super annoying for sure. This is a familiar matchmaking problem that we have had discussions about, notably raid or dungeon matchmaking, although not on as big of a scale. And the vibe I get is that people would rather at least have the ability to try and fail versus not really even having the opportunity at all. And while for raids, I still think matchmaking is a horrible idea, for an activity like this, it's probably a little more feasible, especially if you gate it in some way. For example, you can only queue into tier 7 matchmaking if you've done a tier 7 run of Deep Dive before. I realize this means you still need to find a group initially, but I think some level of barrier is important to keep the quality of players in those kinds of playlists high. Also, to go in the complete opposite direction for a moment, fishing. I would say that up until this point, fishing was a thing that you either really, really liked or really did not get the appeal of at all. But now that it's become linked with an exotic and this mission, it started to piss off a lot of people because you now had to fish for these exotic fish, which could take a while to get each fish, and I totally get that. Not everybody likes fishing. Not everyone likes sitting around hitting one button every 10 seconds. But fortunately, it appears that only one person in your group needs to activate the exotic mission. Not everyone needs to do it, which is a good move. So if you don't like fishing, then just buddy up with somebody who does. Moving on to the weapon itself, Wicked Implement. It's a stasis scout rifle where rapid precision hits give creeping attrition, which will make future shots slow and then freeze targets if you hit them enough. Precision final blows while you have creeping attrition makes a stasis shard, and collecting that shard will refill the magazine. The catalyst makes it so picking up shards eventually overflows the magazine, the catalyst coming from a tier 7 deep dive, although I have heard that you can get it on lower tiers, it's just a lower drop chance. Creeping attrition requires 3 crits in order to activate, not too many shots, and then once you have the buff, it takes a small handful of shots to freeze a target. It's like another 3, 4, 5 maybe. And in terms of any kind of utility play, especially regarding champions, that's going to be pretty convenient. You can fully stun 2 of the 3 champion types with this weapon. Overloads get stunned on slow, and unstops are stunned on shatter. Barriers can also be stopped and or frozen, but it won't proc an actual stun unless you have anti-barrier scout or something like that. So Bungie has already come out and talked about this weapon in a recent update and have said that buffs are coming, which is convenient for me because I get to keep this section a bit shorter. Doesn't really matter what I think of the weapon in its current state when it is getting buffed. But to summarize my thoughts on the weapon, I don't really care for this weapon in lower tier content. I don't really use scouts in low tier stuff. Things die too easily in group content for me to ever care about a gun that requires several precision hits to really get rolling. Now in endgame content, your GMs, your master stuff, am I rushing to use it over things that I'm using right now? Is it gonna break my Quicksilver Storm for Baron's Commemoration, Strand Titan, God tier GM setup? No, not right now anyway. I don't want to trade the Suspend and QSS strengths that I have right now for this scout. I won't want to trade them even when the Suspend nerf hits, unless it's particularly brutal, nor do I want to rotate out of QSS until it gets a nerf. I do appreciate the anti-champion capabilities that it does have. It's pretty good at stunning overloads, whereas unstops take a bit more effort than I'm really willing to do. That being said, the rest of the time that I'm using the weapon is just kind of stale. It's still a plink-plonk, very slow killing weapon the rest of the time. Initially, I was worried that this was going to be a gun like Symmetry or Malfeasance, where I want to get as much value out of the exotic perk as I possibly can, which potentially means you leave damage on the table because you don't want to switch guns. This was not the case for me. I was desperate to rotate off of this weapon whenever possible because the damage output was just not very enticing. I used it to mainly deal with champions, and then the rest of the time, I just wanted to use a machine gun. However, I used this on a Void subclass, not a Stasis one, so perhaps I would have gotten a slightly more enjoyable experience had I been on Stasis, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not that much more enjoyable, to the point where I would want to run a Stasis setup in a GM, unless I guess I was on a Warlock. This is also where we see the opportunity costs, and the costs are somewhat high. I imagine a lot of people are immediately going to call out Agger Scepter, and I would agree, although the guns are pretty different. But Agger's is still a very strong choice when it comes to anything Stasis, although the gun itself is fantastic completely on its own. The more apt comparison to me is something like Riptide or Deliverance with Chill Clip. Chill Clip is able to provide pretty similar capabilities when it comes to the utility part of Wicked Implement. It too can stun overloads and unstops. It too can freeze barriers. Yes, it requires a certain condition to proc Chill Clip. It's also a special weapon, so ammo scarcity is an issue to overcome. But if you're already proficient with Chill Clip on one of these guns, you have those rhythms down against champions, you kind of know what you're doing, then I would say you could probably continue to use those guns over this Scout in the Scout's current state. More cautionary players are probably going to value the Scout a little bit more, stunning champions from really far away, but the more comfortable you are versus champions or in champion combat, the more I would value Chill Clip over this Scout. And after using the Scout in a couple of GMs, the unstop stun experience, again, was a bit slow for my liking, although the overload experience was totally fine. But again, literally none of that matters because it's getting buffed, so we just gotta wait and see what the buff is, and then we will re-evaluate. That is all I have on the Scout and the mission and the deep dive and the fishing and all that stuff. Overall, mission was pretty neat, although definitely not on the same scale as Whisper or Outbreak, but I wasn't really expecting it to be. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.